I got to start with a confession, though. It's a little bit embarrassing. Are there influentive people in the room? I don't want to insult any of you. Mark's over there. I don't really like camping. I don't like the outdoors. I love influentive. I don't like the outdoors. I don't like nature. I don't like getting nature on me. Look at me. Look like pocket square vest that doesn't survive in the nature. The only thing about me that's nature is the beard. So a couple weeks ago, my wife asked me to take my fourth grade daughter on a camping trip with the school kind of camping trip, and I was definitely very reluctant. But I thought, we're in this like super fancy schmancy community, and so I was like, okay, camping is going to be what I see on TV with glamping, and I had this image in my head of sort of what it was going to be like with the kind of Four Seasons meets the tent experience, and so I got myself psyched up, just like I did today for Advocamp. And this is actually kind of like glamping. I like this, by the way. And I got in the car with my daughter, and we drove out to east of Sacramento, which I didn't know there is anything east of there, but nothing against east stuff. And I got to the cabin, and it was a little bit more like this. And so I had to figure out how to get myself psyched up about the next couple of days. It was a whole weekend. And one of the things that's great is anytime you go through a tough experience, you really learn what you value, right? You learn the things you like. And so I took away 3 things I love about camping, the only 3 things. Number 1 is definitely the togetherness. So being around a fire brings everyone together. In this case, it was all the kids and their dads, and it was just awesome, super fun. Number 2, s'mores. I got some s'mores in like the speaker gift bag. Greatest invention, that's like the Albert Einstein level invention of desserts. I love s'mores. And then number 3, camping is the only place in the whole world, the only place where you can actually drink from a flask without shame. So I'm hoping that, are there flasks here today? I'm hoping that there are, but I'm very excited to partake. I know one of my team members in the back is with me there. So excited to talk to you. My name is Nick, and I always do that to remember my name. And one caveat I always do before I do presentations is I speak very fast, so you'll get used to it. So I'm excited to talk to all of you. And so I've got basically 2 things I'm going to talk to you about. So the first one, and this is something I'm super passionate about given what my company does and what we do, is that I think when people think about the value of their customers, people know this term lifetime value, they're doing it wrong, right? And we'll talk more about that, but they're thinking about the value of their customers and dramatically underestimated the value. The second thing I'm hoping I'll leave you with at the end of this is some practical tips on how you can actually use your customer success efforts in driving success for your customers to drive advocacy, and how you can use advocacy to drive customer success. So those are the two kind of things I hope you get out of this presentation today. So let's dive in, and let me give you a little bit of background on my context. Why am I here talking about this? So I run a company called Gainsight. We'll talk more about it at the end. We work with lots of large and growing technology businesses, lots of small businesses as well. I've run a number of technology businesses in the past, always worked on customers and customer support, customer success, and saving customers and keeping them and all that stuff. I invest in a bunch of businesses, advise companies. And at Gainsight, we just talk to lots of companies about their customers. So we have a lot of experience understanding customers. And one of the most fundamental things we talk about at Gainsight when we think about customers is this question: how much is a customer worth to you? So a lot of you work at vendors, so I'm going to make this a group thing. How much is a customer worth to you? Call out how much your customer is worth to you. Quantify it. Sometime your ASP, your LTV, whatever thing you want to say. Somebody.
ARR times value to the power of how many people they advocate to.
Oh my God, you already got the end of the presentation. She works for me, so okay, you don't count. All right, somebody else. How much is your customer worth to you? Somebody tell me your LTV or ASP. Somebody. Mark, how much is your customer worth for you? Influentive, how much is your customer worth? $100,000. Good answer. Thank you for saving me. So how much is your customer worth? So if you Google this and try to understand what's the value of a customer, you can Google lifetime value, and you get this crazy equation that has like a weird E in the front of it. And it basically, most of you know that it's, people say the definition of a customer value is all of the money they're going to pay you over time minus the costs, kind of discounted by the fact that money today is worth more than money tomorrow, right? And that's kind of the value of your customers. That's how we all think about it, right? So this customer is paying us $1,000 a year, and they're worth 1/100th the customer that's paying us $100,000 a year, right? Right? That sounds obvious, right? And obviously, in this line of thinking, you start saying, great, my customers are all about the money they pay me. So if I can actually go and have improved retention rates, I'm going to grow faster because I'm going to keep more of my revenue. And if you've read our stuff, you know that Companies that keep their customers longer grow faster, and that's kind of a duh, like obviously, right? And that's pretty clear. And another thing that's pretty obvious is that companies that keep their customers end up being worth more over time because they basically end up being valued more by investors. So this is all basic stuff. You measure your customers by what they pay you. You actually keep them longer, you grow faster, and you're worth more. Is that the end of the story? I'd challenge you to say that's actually the beginning of the story, and that we're actually asking the wrong question as an industry. So I started out and said, what's a customer worth to all of you? And my question is that the right question, or should the question be something different? How much are the people you work with worth to you, right? And when you think about customer success, how much are the various advocates, users, sponsors, all the people you work with worth to you? 3 stories here on this slide. Amanda Schmidt on the left, I don't think Amanda's in the room. Some folks have probably worked with Amanda in the past. She was a customer of ours at Marketo. She went to Adobe, bought our stuff again. Anjanette Hill Mendoza was a customer of one startup, came to a large company called Advent, bought again. Chad, who's in the room here somewhere, or in the back, outside in the lobby, is at Influitive, now runs customer success, worked with us before. So if we just measured the value of our customers based on that value, that transaction, we would miss all the value of these human beings. And this is why you're all here. So I'm preaching to the choir. But what I think a lot of businesses don't understand is they look at every individual customer at the top level and they say, how much are they spending with us? How much is that over time? And that's all they're worth. And what you end up concluding out of that, as an example, Mark and I have talked about this, is you conclude misguidedly that small customers are worth way less than large customers. And I'd argue in a lot of small customers, you got these amazing advocates that you build good relationships with, and those people go get new jobs at big companies like in this slide, and they can be really, really important. And so our contention, I think this is shared with a lot of people in the room, is that companies are basically dramatically undervaluing their customers. And they're undervaluing them because they're not thinking about the references they do for them. They're not thinking about the referrals they do, the informal referrals in the hallways. They're not thinking about champions. And this is something we think about a lot, where your customers aren't just buying stuff from you. They're champions of getting value out of it. And how do you make them better champions over time? The customers you have are evangelists, speaking at events like this, right? These people are giving you great feedback. And this is one of the things I think people often underestimate, is all the value of the feedback that you get, even from those small customers. And finally, and interestingly enough, some of these best users and advocates become your teammates over time. They actually work with you. They make your company better. And so if I did that LTV calculation, is any of this in there? None of it's in there, right? None of that stuff that's actually a huge chunk of the value of your customers is in the lifetime value calculation. The lifetime value calculation is wrong. And what that means is, bottom line is we're all undervaluing our customers and our customer success programs. So now, to figure things out in SaaS and to really understand them well, you don't have to think anymore. You just have to go to the godfather of SaaS. Does anyone know who the godfather of SaaS is? Who's the godfather of SaaS? All right, let's see, what? Mark Benioff. So yeah, I guess he's the big godfather. I'd say Jason Lemkin, who's a great blogger who blogs online at SaaStr. And Jason has this great blog post where he talks about the fact that the one way to think about this is we have first order revenue, the revenue you get from a customer by buying, staying, and upgrading. And that's how we measure lifetime value. And then second order revenue, this is on his site, where you think about things like the word of mouth, champions, evangelists, et cetera. And I'd challenge us to say, how do we measure not just that first order revenue, but the second order revenue? And then how do we use that to figure out that we need to invest a lot more in customer success and advocacy? And that's the bottom line of this presentation, is how do you get people thinking about that customer as not just the money you're spending with you? And we'll talk about kind of how we do that. So with this, I've got some tips on how do you actually take customer success and advocacy and link them together. So we go through 5 things that we hope you take away from this. Number one, how many of you have customer success teams in your companies? Show of hands. Yeah. And if you don't, you've got something like account managers, salespeople, retention, whatever, right? So those team members are all measured on that lifetime value calculation. They're measured on renewals. They're measured on retention. They're measured on churn. They're measured on upsell. Are they measured on advocacy? Are they measured on the number of reviews that your customer does? The number of App Exchange reviews or G2 Crowd reviews, the number of references, referrals, the influitive advocacy, the community posts. Are they measured on any of that, or are they measured on the financial value? If that CSM or that account manager is compensated not just to drive short-term first-order revenue, but also long-term second-order revenue, you will drive more advocacy in your community. So step number one when you go back is figure out how your company can actually put into your core scorecard advocacy is not just a measure of the marketing team, because many of folks here probably report into marketing, but a measure of the customer success team and the sales team overall. And actually measure it not just at a CSM level, but actually at a customer level. You know, most of you measure your customers in some way. It might be a spreadsheet, might be something like Gainsight. How do you actually measure the value of that customer, not just in the financial value, but in that advocacy? This is an example where you're measuring not just how much they're spending with you, how much they're using of your product, but actually how many references have they done, how many reviews, are they in your community, things like that. Push it down to the customer level, measure the CSM on that, and measure the sales team on that in addition to measuring marketing. So that's step number one. I think it's really, really actionable. I'd love to see every CSM and account management team have this in their MBOs in 2015. Number two is your CSM team or your account management team are the eyes and ears for the customer advocacy team. And I think most of you know that. Like a lot of the great advocates are going to come out of the customer success relationships. You know, the onboarding that went really well, the great survey feedback, that great quarterly business review, the customer that came up with a creative use case on how to use your product. And how do you actually go and turn that into an advocate right away? And one of the things that's interesting about this is how many of you enjoy reading customer case studies on websites, right? Many of you have written them, right? How many enjoy reading them? Most of them kind of suck. And the reason they suck is that they're not real. Like they're not real. So I can write a program to auto-generate every case study, right? It's like so-and-so company had this challenge, met the vendor, 3 million% ROI. Customer success people, they know the real story, right? The real story is that this person was toiling away, kind of annoyed at their boss for not appreciating what they're doing. They met the vendor helped them understand the bigger picture of their job. They implemented this thing, it got them promoted, and there's a real story there, a human story. CSMs have the human story. Get it from them. Leverage that story, and actually operationalize it, right? Figure out how every positive touch point turns into an advocate. And this, Jeanette talked about this as well with the support experience, right? So every time you get a positive net promoter survey result or support case result, every time there's a good QBR, every time a customer comes through onboarding, make it part of your playbook. This is an example, like in our product, of a playbook to track how do you get that person then into the advocate community right away. Because your customers aren't always going to be happy, but when they are, make them advocates, right? So that's number one. I think it's a really, really high value thing you can do. And in Gainsight, actually, specifically, we actually operationalize this. So every time somebody has a great event, we invite them to our inclusive community right away, right? Because that's an important time to do it. So next thing to think about. Many of us have relationships with advocates at senior levels, right? So we have a CMO that loves our product, or a CCO, or a CSO, CEO, blah, blah, blah. And we all know all these C people, the titles, it's really exciting, but the stories aren't very deep, right? Like the customer stories aren't super deep. And you often miss a lot of the real relevance of the day-to-day use of your product. The CSMs can help you find user advocates, not just the executive advocates. The executives bought the product, but the users use them. How do you work with your CSM team to identify users that love what you do, right? And so one way to think about that is how do you use the CSM team to identify the people outside of your normal user as well? So in this case, this is a real example from Gainsight. Like we were looking at our own system and looking at our usage and saw this customer, one of our big kind of public SaaS company customers, and most of our users tend to be CSMs, right? So we're like, oh great, CSMs, this is usage over a period of time. CSM was using it, another CSM, and then there was a sales rep in there. And we're like, what's that sales rep doing using Gainsight? And we went and talked to the sales rep, and they're like, I've driven hundreds of thousands of dollars of new pipeline through Gainsight. And we had never talked to that person. They have no idea who we are, or we are in terms of individuals. We never talked to them. That's a new advocate for us. So how do you use the CSM team to find not just the executives, but the actual users on the ground using your system? Next tip. When you look at your advocates, and if you think so much of the value is actually in those advocates, how do you use the CSM team and the advocacy to get team together to partner to follow those advocates wherever they go, right? Sounds a little bit stalkerish, but how do you follow them no matter when they go get promoted, they move into a new job internally, they go to a new company? And let's talk about the audience here. What should we do when our advocate goes to a new company? What should we do? What's that? Stalk them. I like it. Stalk them. That's great. Any specific stalking activities we want to suggest? What do you want to do? Bottle of champagne. Congratulations on the new job. What else? Maybe help them with one of the challenges in their job. If they're a new manager, help them find people, right? Don't try to sell them right away. Don't try to go get them bought on your product. They're going to buy it eventually if they liked you, right? How do you build that relationship? And Gainsight, we, in our company, obviously our advocates are super important. So that woman, Anjanette, she's at Advent. If she ever goes somewhere else down the road, we're going to track where she is and continue to work with her, right? And it's really important to us to track those relationships. So that's the number 4 is, as a CSM team working with the customer advocacy team, track your advocates wherever they go. Last thing, and this is actually probably the most counterintuitive. Everyone in the world knows that successful customers can become advocates. We all know that, right? Successful customers, happy customers become advocates. What a lot of people don't realize is advocates become more successful customers. Advocates become more successful customers. Now, they can't hate you to start with. That doesn't work, right? But if they reasonably like you, they'll like you even more. What happens is you go speak on behalf of a vendor, you're a reference, you're a case study. I'm speaking at this event, and you go back and you're like, I want to do more. I'm going to go back to my team tonight. They're going to hate it. And I'm going to say, we need to do more with Influitive. I'm going to be like, we need to do this. And send this really long email about how Hootsuite's doing these amazing things with Influitive, right? And so how do you actually make sure that you leverage your advocates to make them more successful? This is an example of a customer that came to one of our events, and this is their usage week over week. And after they spoke at the event, it spiked up. And so just to wrap things up, if you boil it all together, we need to, as an industry, move from looking at just the short-term metrics on financial value, and this is a great quote from Albert Einstein, to all those long-term metrics of real value, which I think advocacy is a really critical part of that. And so I'll skip the Gainsight commercial, but obviously we do all kinds of great stuff there. Love to have you at our conference in a couple weeks, which is all about the next step of customer success. And just to close out, feel free to follow me on Twitter. And if you remember nothing else, customer success team members and customer marketing team members can be best friends. I think there's a really great relationship forming. Thank you very much.